Hello, I'm Liz Whiteacre, and we're about to talk about shapes and forms in poetry. Our goals in this exploration is to think about the importance of finding models. So, taking a look at what's out there so you get a sense of what can exist, ways to explore poems, not just as people who are enjoying a poem, but also in ways we can learn from them as poets ourselves. Also, thinking about what might be the best form or shape for your own poem. And we will end on some drafting tips and some challenges. First, before we get started, what I'd like you to do is grab a piece of paper and a writing utensil, and I'd like you to sketch a tree. So we're going to take a quiet moment, draw a tree. It can be a stick figure-ish. If it's too fancy, I might interrupt you, but what's the first thing that comes to mind? What does that tree look like? All right, have you got your tree? Here's mine. I ended up drawing a pine tree because I've been watching some birds going in, making a nest earlier today. You hold on to what you've created. The reason why I asked you to draw what first came to your mind is that sometimes we return to ideas we already know very well, ways of doing things that are comfortable. And if we don't press ourselves, if we don't take little risks, if we don't kind of check out the greater world and what's going on, sometimes we miss opportunities. So here I went and I found 4 different trees, which don't look anything like my tree at all. Um, and that's okay. But it's good to remind myself that there are so many different kinds of trees out there, right? So we have a palm tree, we have deciduous tree, we have a tree that almost looks like it was done with splatter paint. And then there's the tree where it's in profile, it's not colored in, and so the background colors are shading it there for us. So a lot of different creative approaches to putting a tree on paper. I'm a little bit curious about what tree you put on your paper, if it's similar in style or type to any of the examples we're seeing here. And that's something to consider. If you're like, oh, my mind went to a palm tree too, chances are your palm tree is still unique. It's not exactly the same as this palm tree here with the setting sun. And if, like me, you went to a pine tree, oh yeah, and there are a lot of other different types of trees I could have gone with. So that's the point in finding models. Sometimes when poets are new to their practice, they get concerned that reading other people's poems might shape them too much or taint their creativity in some way, that they won't be able to come up with their own stuff, right? That they are too influenced by others. But in reality, if we're not reading and engaging with the writing community, if we're not seeing a lot of models of different ways to write poems and maybe deal with topics that we're interested in, then we're limiting our possibilities rather than exploring them. We aren't recognizing that there might be tools or strategies out there that we don't know yet, that if we practice using them, we can make some amazing things on our own if we had those additional tools in our toolbox, if you will. So finding models allows us to explore possibilities in poetry, to develop understanding. There are some poems you're going to come across where you think, no, 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 thank you. Not to my taste. And that can teach you a lot too. Are you doing those same types of things in your poems and maybe not being of taste to your readers as well? Or maybe you see something new that you're interested in trying and you get really excited about it. It can also help you developing your understanding of not just poetry, but the way you're seeing and engaging with your world as well. It can add to your craft toolkit, giving you additional strategies to pull from while you're trying to articulate your message to your readers. And kind of as you move a little bit further and start paying attention to it, it can help you identify markets. Where might your work fit into the world when you're ready to disseminate it? If you've been engaging with poetry magazines and publishers and other poets, you might have already found a place where you fit, and it might be a great place to share your work, and that's going to get to readers. And it can help you connect with audiences. If you see, a lot of writing happening and you feel like you can contribute, well, the people reading that writing are people who might enjoy your writing as well. And as a reader, right, again, if you read something, oh, it just grates on your nerves. Oh, well, maybe I don't want to do that in my poetry. So reminding yourself what it feels like to be an audience member can help you be a better poet as you are creating things for other people. When you start exploring poems, it can be overwhelming because there's so much stuff out there. So I wanted to talk about two different types of poems that might help you kind of pick a path to start walking on, depending on your personal preference and either what you already enjoy writing or maybe what you don't know as much about, and it might be fun to explore that new terrain. So the two types of poetry I wanted to focus on today are fixed forms and free verse. So fixed forms are essentially like recipes. I have a recipe card there to help us remember. These are poems that you've come across, likely as a student when you were in elementary or grammar school. And you might also know them because some of them are part of popular culture and historical culture. But names for types of poems like the sonnet, rondeaus, sestinas, occasional poems, acrostic poems. Probably you've made one with your name at some point. Found poems, haikus, pontoons, ballads, and I even just put an ellipse there because the list goes on and on and on. You can buy thick books that teach you all about the different forms of poetry, and there are endless web pages out there. So essentially a fixed form is a recipe, and that recipe comes from someone writing in a form consistently, and it often is passed down through generations because poet sees somebody writing a sonnet and they think, oh, hey, that's really cool. I'm going to give that a shot too, and work with the structure that's recognizable to readers, but make the content and the experience unique to my understanding of that moment. And we'll see, especially in the sonnet, that one's so famous that, a lot of people are familiar with Shakespeare's sonnets. And then over, the ages, people kind of put twists on the recipes. And we kind of have an Italian school where those poets kind of made their own. And so it's pretty cool. It's kind of like maybe a family recipe, and it's your great grandma's brownies, and you grew up eating it, but your mom put some walnuts in it, and now you're starting to make it, and you leave out the walnuts because they were never your favorite, but maybe you've added dried cherries or something like that to make it a little bit your own. So fixed forms can offer a really interesting connection to history, especially if the twist you might bring to the form to kind of put your own personal stamp on it helps readers engage with it in a new way. And it can also be a really interesting exercise as a poet or writer because essentially you're trying to follow that recipe. And in doing that, you have to think differently perhaps of how you would normally write a line or how you normally would approach something. But if you're going to have a ballad and it's going to have refrains that are repeated, and you usually don't do that kind of repetition, you need to think in a different way. So working with fixed forms in your practice, even if they don't become poems that you share with other people, can be a wonderful way to strengthen skills and get yourself familiar with things like meter or specific beat patterns or rhyming and rhyming schemes, if that's something that you don't already do. Line breaks can be wonderful to learn, stanza breaks. So I definitely recommend exploring with fixed forms and seeing what fits you and your unique vision and voice, and also strengthening your skills as a writer. The other type of poetry we're going to focus on is free verse. And at its base, free verse just means the poem has no rhyme in it and no regular meter. And again, meter goes back to the beat or the rhythm. If we think about that Shakespearean sonnet, it has a very famous iambic pentameter. So there are patterns in the lines that often sound like the heartbeat, where we have a dun 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 dun, right? As we go through the line, we end on a rhyming word and then we move to the next line. So it's very rhythmic, very soothing. So in free verse, that's not happening. This leads us to a question that often people who are new to poetry or new to writing poetry have. What are the rules? Some people come into the practice thinking there are no rules, whatever I want goes, which in some ways is true, but different interpretations of that will lead to different experiences for your audience. And then other people, depending on maybe they've been reading or they studied it in school, they feel like poetry has too many rules and it just is so constraining. They much rather go spend their time writing stories where they have prose and can go the whole length of the page and not worry about things on such a detailed level. What's most important that you think about as you are looking at models and as you are trying to write in different and new ways as you explore, that within the poem, I like to think of it as kind of an ecosystem. Everything in your poem should be working together to create something that the audience can come to and enjoy and appreciate. All of the parts are working together to create that experience. So as you're making a poem, regardless of whether or not you're using someone else's recipe, or in a way, you're kind of coming up with your own scratch recipe with all of the ingredients you have on hand, you're showing an awareness, right? That everything you're doing in the poem is there for a reason, and an awareness of the audience that as you invite that reader into your poem, you are aware that they're there and that they are going on this journey with you. Thinking about consistency is important too. Sometimes I'll read poems in early stages of their life, if you will, and maybe a poet has decided to take out punctuation, but there are 3 or 4 things left. And I'm reading and I'm thinking, why? Like, what's the significance of that period? Why is that there? Why is that so important? Or why is this happening? And it gets me kind of caught up because, it's kind of a glaring omission. It's not gone like all the other ones. And so oftentimes I'll find out, oh, that was a typo, right? Like, I forgot I was taking things out and I missed those couple. So consistency is important. If you're maybe capitalizing the start of a word, why are you doing that if it's not normally a proper noun? And if you're starting to do that, then why aren't you doing that in each case where the reader would expect that to happen? And then also thinking about intention. If I take some time to think about why that is the way it is in your poem, is there a payoff for me as a reader? Do I feel like I've unlocked a secret maybe? Or It's enhanced my understanding of the poem and my personal experience in some way. And then finally, clarity. All of the choices you're making in the end should make sense to your reader. It should be clear to them what they've just gone through in the poem. And I don't say clarity in terms of necessarily the meaning being really, really clear. Maybe the point of the poem is to stress me out. And so I might not be totally sure what's happening, but at the end of the poem, I have high anxiety and am, oh, what's going on? Right? So the intention there was clear. It's clear to me I'm supposed to be feeling awful at the end, and I am just as confused as the speaker in the poem. So by clarity, it's clear to me that I've gone through what I've gone through to have this kind of physiological response. Um, it's also nice if, as a reader, I know what's going on. There might be a sense of narrative or a meditation happening there, but by clarity, I mean it's clear to others who are reading it, what's going on with the messages, what we're supposed to get from the poem. If you think of yourself as the guide from start to finish, from here is the title of the poem, boom, 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 we are at the end of the poem. All of the choices you're making are helping your reader navigate, like that map on the screen right now. Lots of twists and turns and all sorts of different alleyways that could be taken to get us from point A to point B. There are a lot of different options. And so as the poet, you're setting the path for your readers and helping them navigate the emotion you want to share, the story you want to share, the imagery you want to share. That's your job. And so all of the choices you're making, whether or not it's to break a line here or here, should be serving that purpose. When you're thinking about exploring form and shape as a poet yourself, right, so you're kind of shifting from us looking at models to, all right, I've got this poem, I need to do something with it, right? I personally like to break that up into 4 distinct experiences. So when I'm creating a poem, I like to think about the first impression I am giving readers. And by first impression, that's usually the title. It might also be if I've just opened a book or a magazine or flipped up a computer screen, it could also be that initial visual impression. So what it looks like on the page. When I shifted to this slide, you saw that bright artwork there of all of the different diamonds and patterns and colors. And then you saw kind of the shape of the 4 bullet points on the right going from large to small. That was the visual first impression. And then you saw exploring form and shapes. You're like, okay, this might be the topic we're talking about. And then we're going to go through these things. So first impression might be the title and or the visual shape of the poem on the page. Next is the invitation. And to me, that's the welcome, or you're kind of moving from the title into those first few lines or first stanza of the poem. How are you starting to orient your reader so that they understand what's going on? Are they eavesdroppers here? Are they observers here? Are they part of the action? Are they being addressed by second person? How are they getting in the mix? Is it medias res, in the middle of things? Are you starting them at the beginning of something? So you're kind of inviting them in, and they're figuring out where they are in relation to what's happening in the poem. And then as the poem goes, I kind of think of that as the journey, right? Hey, come on, I'm going to take you to this place, and all the things that happen, and then that arrival or the end of the poem, the resolution of some sort, or the ending image or emotion that you want your readers to leave with. I wanted to share a poem that I've written. This is just kind of the first draft of form. It's set up right now as a free write, but this might also look a little bit like a prose poem or a poem that doesn't have any line breaks in it. I'm going to read this to you here so you can kind of get a sense of it, what it is sitting on the page. And then I'm going to talk about some different revision choices I made getting towards the final draft that was eventually published. So here we go. Pain seduces you slowly until one morning you wake to find its toothbrush in your bathroom, its underwear in your laundry basket, its non-fat vanilla soy milk in your fridge. Saturday mornings, Pain sips coffee with you on the sofa, laughs over New Yorker cartoons. Soon you take Pain home to meet your family. It sits between you and Grandma at the long table, leaves with you at dusk, and complains bitterly the whole drive home of the many miles, the bread pudding, the early Monday to come. Inseparable, Pain helps prepare taxes, pick paint for the kitchen walls, trim toenails. Each night before bed, it hums between the sheets. Pain is needy, doesn't like when you're unconscious, wakes you the moment you dream of something else. So that's the poem with no line breaks in it. And you might kind of think about your first impression there. Probably just glancing at it, it felt like maybe a story or technical writing document was about to head your way. Because this is in the visual mode of a PowerPoint presentation, your first impression might have been like, "Whoa, that's a lot of text all at once." So this is just an excerpt of the beginning of the poem that fits on the slide, where I started to play around with line breaks and stanza breaks. And so a line break is where the line ends. That first one is pain seduces you slowly until one morning you wake to find. And then a stanza break would be that white space in between basket and the next line, it's non-fat vanilla soy milk. In a way, it's not so much as like a chapter break. It might be a little bit more like the feeling of a paragraph break when you're moving from stanza to stanza. And notice here that this is all kind of happening where the narrator or the speaker in this is talking about pain to you, and saying, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. And we're really focused on the relationship the whole time. We're shifting locations, thinking in terms of kind of a list of, these are all of the different ways that your relationship is expressing itself. So when I'm thinking about breaking this into stanzas, I'm thinking a little bit more maybe about applying the breaks than I necessarily would, and slowing people down in my list than I necessarily would if I were writing a poem where maybe it's really clear that I'm moving from the house to the park to the office, right? Where the scenery or the location is very clearly changing, or maybe I'm changing times of day, or I'm changing points of view, or I'm changing moments in time. I'm moving from the past towards perhaps the present, or doing a flashback. So there are a lot of different reasons why you might want to put in a line break. Here, I wanted to start exploring with, again, kind of slowing down the list a little bit. And then I also thought it might be interesting to do couplets or two-line stanzas, since I am talking about a relationship here between you and pain. So I thought I might play around with that. When I started to break the lines here, I wanted to, again, slow it down a little bit. And so I found that I was making a little bit longer line and choosing to end on words that would give you an image. So like find, basket, mornings, cartoons, and right, to give that word a little bit more emphasis, bitterly. So I'm just going to read the first two stanzas, and let's see how that changes a little bit from the draft where it was all one big paragraph. Pain seduces you slowly until one morning you wake to find its toothbrush in your bathroom, its underwear in your laundry basket, its non-fat vanilla soy milk in your fridge. Saturday mornings, Payne sips coffee with you on the sofa, laughs over New Yorker cartoons. So having those moments where as readers we have to stop at the word find, lift up, move down to its, right? We hit basket, lift up, oh, there's nothing there, we have to go down one more. Even though readers are able to do that fairly quickly, right? We're all used to reading left to right, moving down, so we're not doing anything new there. It still is a moment where we have to pause our brains as readers and get to the next thing before we can continue processing, versus when it was in one big long paragraph and we could just move left to right, ding, left to right, ding, and get all of that information in very quickly. So the longer your line is, actually the more quickly it reads, because you're not putting in as many obstacles for your reader, essentially not as many pauses as you go. So I decided that I was curious about slowing the poem down even further by using a much shorter line. And again, the first impression of this might be, oh, really small. But when I read it, I'm going to take a look at that first stanza and the next line. I have to move more slowly through the poem because of those line breaks. Pain seduces you slowly until one morning you wake to find its toothbrush in your bathroom, its underwear in your laundry basket, its non-fat vanilla soy milk in your fridge. So this got really slow. And this time, to kind of find those moments of pause a little bit, shorter into the line, notice that I relied a bit more on punctuation breaks. So reduces you slowly, comma, bathroom, comma, basket, fridge. So the using punctuation to help you start making line breaks can be really helpful. In this one, I liked that there weren't as many stanza breaks, but I wasn't as big a fan of the super slow line, because this is kind of a memory. I'm not trying to build tension and make you worry about, oh no, what's going to happen with that toothbrush? Right? Like, is somebody going to get hurt? There's not that need for tension here. This is a little bit more about reflection. So this is how I ended on the particular form for this poem that ended up being, it was published by a literary magazine under a different name, and then this appeared in a chapter that I wrote under the title Peen Courts. And so this is the full poem. I thought it would be helpful for you to be able to kind of take it in with its title here. And I ended up removing any stanza breaks, so it was a little bit more of a sense of a narrative, like when it was in the paragraph form or prose form. And then I decided on kind of a happy medium between the really short lines and the longer lines. And so I'll just read the first couple of lines so you can hear the difference in those. Pain courts. Pain seduces you slowly until one morning you wake to find its toothbrush in your bathroom, its underwear in your laundry basket, its non-fat vanilla soy milk in your fridge. Right? So I don't have as many maybe deliberate pauses as I did in the last example. To me, it read a little bit more comfortably when I read it out loud, and it felt a little bit more like a story that I'm telling you about your relationship with pain, at least how I'm observing it. So those are just some of the decisions that I was making as I was going through this process many years ago when I created this poem, and I hope you found it helpful. Again, I'm sharing my work here because I can tell you this is what the poet did, because I'm that person, right? But as you're reading, if you're lucky enough to have other poets in your life and you get to read their rough drafts, that's something to think about. What would happen if, right, some things change? What would happen if this was first person instead of second person? Or if it was past tense instead of present tense. So a lot of times playing around with the form, the shape, the point of view, for all of those things can produce subtle differences in your poem. And as a poet, you can go back to those kind of guidelines of, well, what's my first impression? How am I inviting people in? What is this journey I want people to take? Where do I want them to arrive? And then thinking about consistency, all of those things. So as you are shooting for those goals of the first impression, invitation, journey, and arrival, you are thinking about, am I being flexible? Have I tried out as many different options as I can, right? It's like when you have to wear formal wear for something, it's rare that it's the very first thing you pull off the rack and try on that you end up going with. And if it is, you've usually tried on a bunch of stuff to let you know whether or not that first thing you pulled off was the one to go with. So being flexible with your process, trying things out, not being, wedded to, oh, this is the very first thing, I'm not going to look at anything else. Being consistent. Why are you doing this, right? Everything in your poem, people are going to assume is intentional and mean something, is contributing to that experience. So be consistent so people aren't like, what's this doing here? What? And have that pull them out of the poem. And then again, clarity. Why is all this happening? And is it clear to the reader at the end? Oh, okay, that's why. Our skills practice this week, something that I hope that you will try, is to think about finding a model poem. Sometimes if you do this on the internet, we had shared some resources earlier about like the Academy of American Poets, the Poetry Foundation, finding something that you can kind of pick up, copy, and paste. It can be helpful, or I recommend handwriting. But try writing out someone else's poem. Be very careful that you're doing it exactly as they did. And then revise its form in 3 different ways. Really push yourself. Like, what are 3 different ways this poem could be created and put together? Think like use the 3 little pigs as inspiration, right? All of those different ways to build houses, and then you're trying to figure out, well, which is the most successful? Why might the poet have ended up in the form that I'm seeing published? Why don't these other ones work as well, or fall down, or don't maybe seem as genuine? And I don't know, if you end up with something more amazing, maybe don't tell the poet that. That might stress them out. And then once you've done that once with a work that you admire, now repeat it with a poem of your own. You're starting to draft some poems for this course. Work through one of your rough drafts and see, well, what would happen if I change this up 3 different times? I have 4 iterations of the poem now. What's working, right? What is serving my message to my readers in the most engaging and compelling way? And sometimes you realize, oh, the first way was the most awesome. Sometimes you realize, oh, I'm so glad I tried this because I like this one even better. And sometimes each one of the 4 things is doing something interesting, and all of them can inform a revision of the original. You might kind of pull a little element in from each one. So definitely check that out and give yourself that challenge this week. And then I wanted to leave you with a writing prompt in case you've been thinking, I've got extra time and I'm not sure what to do with it. I invite you to do a fixed form this week. Hit the internet, explore fixed forms. Wikipedia has a ton of great pages on different types of form if you're not sure where to start out, or you're welcome to just Google a form that you've heard about before, or maybe go back to one that you already know, but look up that recipe and give it a try. Take that recipe for the form and create your own new poem about what it is you're interested in writing about. Looking ahead, we are going to explore the line next. So taking a little bit more time to look more closely at line breaks, and why might I want to break at a piece of punctuation versus a noun versus at the breath, where I naturally would take a breath to pause. So we're going to be exploring that. So as you're looking at the larger shape of your poem and you're exploring fixed forms and also making up the rules on your own as you go, you can do so with some additional techniques. I cannot wait to see what you create. Happy writing.